We have welcome cards on the back table. We invite you to fill one out before you leave today. You can give it to Susan Isler or to me so we can be in touch with you and encourage you on your spiritual journey. It is good to be back. Jeffrey and I were with our extended family up at Donner Lake last week. I'll say a little more about that later, but we had a wonderful time, and it's good to be back. And special thanks to Kay Colette, who helped lead worship last Sunday. Today is the last in our series of A Word for the Week series in July, and the word today is roots. So we'll be thinking about different aspects of roots and rootedness today. And again, we've made copies of individual words that we've been using each week on the back table to invite you to take one with you. And as a reminder of what we reflect on today. So please feel free to take today's words or any of the words from the week, from the month. Next Sunday, we are back inside, back in the sanctuary. So
and it'll be hot.
And it'll be hot. Marcia predicts it. It'll happen. It'll be really hot. So we'll turn on the fans in there. We've had every kind of weather this summer. But remember, 9:30 throughout August. But we will be back in the sanctuary. And the worship committee and I chose to do the God on Broadway series again. So next week is The Sound of Music. And some of you will remember, yay, some of you voted for that. We had a poll back in June, I think it was. And one of our beloved young musicians, Cooper Burdick, will be back singing for us, which is a joy. He's a student now at UCLA, and we just love to see him and hear him again. So Cooper will be here for 2 weeks. So next week, 9:30 in the sanctuary. And I'm very grateful that the guitar player I live with is playing today. So I get to hear him almost every day when I come home. He's practicing in the living room. So all of you will get to hear Jeffrey today. So as we move into this time of reflecting, of worshiping the holy, of knowing again what is most true about what it means to be the human family, to know we are held in love and grace in times of joy and sorrow. Let us join in singing our first song, In the Bulb, and John will play it through once. I'll invite you to stand. Stand if you're able. In the bulb there is a flower, in the seed an apple tree, in cocoons a hidden promise, butterflies will soon be free. In the cold and snow of there's a spring that waits to be unrevealed until its season, something God alone can see. There's a song in every silence, seeking word and melody. There's a dawn in every darkness, bringing hope to you and me. From the past will come the future, what it holds a mystery, unrevealed until its season, something
This morning we're reading from Psalms from Praying by Nan Merrill. Psalm 90, 1 through 6 and 16 and 17. Eternal and immortal one, you have been our refuge in all generations. Before the mountains were brought forth, before you had formed the earth and the world, from everlasting to everlasting, you are the Alpha and the Omega. When our days on earth are ended, you welcome us home to your heart, to the city of light, where time is eternal and days are not numbered. You gather those who love you as friends returning from a long journey, giving rest to their souls. You anoint them with the balm of understanding, healing wounds of the past. Let your love be known to the nations, your glory to our children's children. Let the grace and gentleness of the Holy Spirit be upon us, guiding our feet upon paths of love, consciousness. Increase the light within us. O beloved, hear our prayer.
Scotland, you're Columba. In Ireland, Comkill. Like two different lovers, they both claimed you as their own. Then you sailed away from Ireland's shore. You had mysteries to explore. You landed on Iona and opened heaven's door. A servant to the bakers, a wise man to the kings, a legend to the Celts, for all the love you bring. Generations come to worship and pilgrims to explore, to a land that you made holy upon a windswept shore. I thought I saw you one night in the Abbey asleep, a band of holy angels, a silent watch they keep. I walked along Columba Bay, where waters run deep. I felt your holy presence. There's eternal things to see. In Scotland, you're Columba. In Ireland, Comkill. Like two different lovers, they both claimed you as their own. Then you sailed away from Ireland's shore. You had mysteries to explore. You landed on Iona and opened heaven's door. Scotland, your Columba in Ireland, come kill. Like two different lovers, they both claimed you and always will. The sun be thine, grace of the love of the skies be thine, grace of the love of the stars be thine, grace of the love of the moon be thine, grace of the love of the sun be thine.
Our first reading today comes from the Hebrew Scriptures, from the book of Deuteronomy, considered part of the Torah for our Jewish brothers and sisters. And these particular verses are known as the Shema. In Hebrew, that is a verb that means hear or listen. And it is a central part of, as some scholars say, the Jewish profession or confession of faith. And it's usually put together, this part of Deuteronomy from chapter 6, a part of Deuteronomy chapter 11, and part of Numbers chapter 15. And in Jewish worship and prayers, these are all put together for morning and evening prayer and services. And this, again, this word, Shema, comes from the very first word in this passage, meaning to listen or hear. I decided I'd read this Shema passage today from the Message, this more contemporary version. So, listen. Listen, attention, people of Abraham and Sarah. God is our God. God is the one source of all. Love God, your God, with your whole heart. Love with all that's in you. Love with all you've got. Write these commandments that I've given you today on your hearts. Get them inside of you, and then get them inside of your children. Talk about them wherever you are, sitting at home or walking in the street. Talk about them from time to time when you get up in the morning to when you fall into bed at night. Put them on your hands. Tie them on your foreheads as a reminder. Inscribe them on the doorposts of your homes and on your city gates. And reading 2 verses from the prophet Jeremiah as we think about generations and roots. From Jeremiah 17:7 and 8. Blessed are those who trust in God, whose trust is God. They shall be like a tree planted by water, sending out its roots by the stream. Let us pause for a moment of prayer. Holy and gracious one, we hear these ancient words, beloved words, about your love, about it being in our hearts, about what it means to tell of that love to the next generations and to trust that those roots go deep and are watered by you. Open our hearts to the ways we can experience being rooted, that we might be transformed. Amen. Roots. Roots of trees. Family trees. Roots and branches. Rooted in love. Roots and reunions. These are words that have been swirling around for me this week. In 1964, I went to my grandparents' 50th wedding anniversary in Garrison, North Dakota. My mother was one of 4 children who grew up in this little town. My grandfather was the dentist, the only dentist. And as I remember being pretty small and then seeing pictures of that 50th wedding anniversary, there were 16 grandchildren there. I come from a large extended family on my mom's side, the Stewarts, and a pretty large family on the Cochran side. But the Stewarts are the ones I'm thinking about right now. And every summer, while I was growing up, my aunts and uncles and cousins would all gather at a lake cabin outside of Spokane, Washington, Newman Lake, for 2 weeks. Some of my cousins lived in that area. Others came from North Dakota. We came up from Southern California. 2 weeks at Newman Lake every summer with my Stewart cousins. And even though we were not together very often, we felt this connection and this bond with each other. Fast forward a couple decades. My dad died in 2002, and 2 of my aunts and 2 of my uncles had also passed. Some of my cousins came to my dad's service, and when they were there, they said, "We need to get together again. We're not gathering at the lake outside of Spokane. We haven't done that for a long time, but we need to get together." So the seeds were planted then in 2002 for a Stewart family reunion. And now we're all spread out. Pennsylvania, Virginia, Maryland, Kentucky, North Dakota, California, Washington. So with much planning, we gathered in 2003. And at that time, we gathered at Priest Lake. 2 of my cousins have cabins there. 48 people, at least 7 dogs. Lots of Labradors, a few golden retrievers. For a few days with my mom and our cousins, it was wonderful. This whole group has not gathered all together since 2003. But last year, one of my younger cousins who lives in Livermore and I started talking and dreaming and planning. And last week, 35 of us gathered at Donner Lake. Yay! Ages 2 to 75. And we talked a lot about these memories of growing up together, and that our family tree is rooted to my grandparents, Cecil and Sibylla Stewart in Garrison, North Dakota. I brought a picture from last week if anybody wants to see all of us gathered together. So you may have been to family reunions, large and small, and sometimes they're full of joy and laughter. Sometimes there is shock to realize who we are related to. Sometimes there is tension. Sometimes there is emotional baggage from the past. All of that. And reunions can be family, friends, colleagues, hometowns, projects that we worked on. Maybe you were adopted and that there's a different feeling around family and family trees and family reunions. I think there's lots of different kinds of connections and roots. It can be to a place. It can be to a community. I want to share with you a few lessons that I learned on my summer vacation and my family reunion as we think about roots. One of them is, I think we are part of a family, even though we have not met. We are part of a family or different families, even if we haven't actually met. It was an amazing feeling to drive up to Donner Lake and gather around picnic tables for our first group dinner. And I saw familiar faces of cousins, and then moved into the arms and hugs of people I had never met. Spouses and children and fiancés and partners, cousins I hadn't seen for 20 years or more, that we are part of this circle. Soon we were talking and laughing and eating together. And one thing that was important were name tags. Because people honestly didn't know each other, and some had looked over the list. But until you have names and faces together, that is my hope and a vision of what a church, our church, can be like. How the Holy One calls our church to be that kind of welcoming community. That people can come on Sunday morning or through the week and feel genuinely welcome. We're glad you're here. We've never met you, but you are welcome here. You belong here. In any way or form that works for that particular person. I think we're good at this. Some of you have shared that was your experience when you first started coming. I don't always call the church as a family. There are pluses and minuses of that. But we are a community of connection and care and friendship. And I was reminded of all that, of what it means to feel connected and welcomed, even if you don't know people right away. That these experiences of the reunion made me feel more deeply connected to the whole human family. And how do we live each day in ways that build relationships, even in contentious times? Another thing I learned was that family trees have surprising roots and branches. Part of the fun is telling stories, and I actually did a trivia game that our whole family played to see if they could discover some new things from each other about our family, and we kept sharing. I learned a little more about how my grandparents ended up in North Dakota. They were from Indiana. My grandfather went to dental school in Louisville. He ended up in North Dakota, and his brother, Archie, went to Alaska in about 1915 to be a dentist. I wish I could hear more about that story. We talked about an interesting trip that my mother took that most of my cousins didn't know. When she was 9 years old, her mother and grandfather took her to Germany from this tiny town, and she was 9 years old, from North Dakota to New York. They got on a steamer ship to Germany to visit relatives there. What that must have been like for her, and she did talk about that as I was growing up. One of the things I told my cousins was my mother used to say, when she met her cousins who were her age, 1930 in Germany, they said to her, "Please take us with you. We are afraid." They felt it then. They couldn't bring them back to the States. But even children were picking up that something awful was unfolding then. I also learned a few years ago when I was doing more genealogy research before we went to Scotland, I researched the Cochran side of my family, who are also Scottish and Scotch-Irish, and I learned that they came from Paisley, Scotland. And I learned that Paisley, Scotland is a place of weavers and fabric makers. And I have always loved fabric. And I thought, well, it is in my DNA. And my sister and I went to Paisley and saw the name Cochran all over town with the weavers weaving fabric. Isn't that amazing? How connected even our DNA might be in discoveries. Jesus' family tree, very surprising. And it's interesting that we have this record in Matthew's gospel about who was in his family tree and how it got recorded. I want to read just a little bit of it to you from the first chapter of Matthew. The family tree of Jesus Christ. Those are the first words of the Gospel of Matthew. The family tree of Jesus Christ. David's son, Abraham's son. Abraham had Isaac. Isaac had Jacob. Jacob had Judah and his brothers. Judah had Perez and Zerah. The mother was Tamar. That is surprising. This is a patriarchal system. But here's Tamar, who was kind of outside the tree, but in the tree, gets named. Perez had Hezron. Hezron had Aram. Aram had Aminadab. Aminadab had Nahshon. Nahshon had Salmon. Salmon had Boaz. His mother was Rahab. Also surprising. Boaz had Obed. Ruth was his mother. Not only a woman, a Moabite, a foreigner, shows up in Jesus' family tree. In the text. Very surprising. Obed had Jesse. Jumping ahead to verse 16, Jacob had Joseph, Mary's husband. That's surprising. Joseph, the father, but it was Mary, Mary's husband. Not Mary was Joseph's wife, Mary's husband. The Mary who gave birth to Jesus, Jesus who was called Christ. There were 14 generations from Abraham to David, another 14 from David to the Babylonian exile, and yet another 14 from the Babylonian exile to Christ. For that culture, numbers mattered. That synchronicity and parallelism gave credence that this is the one. But there are some surprising people in that tree. So this inclusiveness, this broadness of this Jesus of Nazareth and his roots. I also was reminded that in life, in death, in life beyond death, God is with us. This holy. As we gathered last week at the lake, there was an awareness that many of those that we loved had died. And yet, as we gathered, the grief was not overwhelming. We knew those we loved were somehow present. We shared some of the challenges that come in seasons of grief and loss. We did not have to hide our questions, our pain. We talked about the ways we experienced love and grace. It was a time that reminded me that this invitation is to be authentic, not to just put on a facade, but when we are hurting and when we are missing people we love, we bring that to our community, to our church, to being together. I learned this feeling that the Holy One, that God provides a feast in the kingdom, that there is abundance. As I mentioned, there were 35 children and teenagers and adults at the reunion last week, and feeding this group at a condo for 4 days was no small miracle. It was a blessing that my sister Pam runs the Meals on Wheels program at her church in Pittsburgh. In 2003, my mother, who is a dietitian, was in charge of planning all the group meals and stopped at the Costco in Spokane. The mantle, the baton has been passed to Pam. We asked her, would you be the one? Yes, she said. So she and her husband landed at Reno, went directly to Costco, had her list for a group meal every day. We had this group of units that had a common area right near the lake. My son Jackson, his room was the host room. So we gave her the position of being the director of food services. And with lots of good planning and the food prep teams, the meals were amazing. And every dinner was a feast. And we had little kids and teenagers who needed lots of lasagna and watermelon and everything else. But that abundance, there was enough. But that's how it feels in this abundance of love and grace, that everyone will be fed spiritually, all of it, that there's enough, that's what we want. That's our vision. What are the ways our church can answer that call?